The scrap metal recycling industry has always run on hustle, trust, and sharp instincts. This is the podcast for traders and operators who want to get sharper without losing their scrappy edge. I'm Stu Kagan, bringing you insights and stories from the people shaping the future of our industry. This is Born Scrappy. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Doing really well. How are you, Stuart?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you, Bob.
Happy
Welcome to
Happy
Born
New
Scrappy.
Year.
Happy New Year. I always ask how long you can still say that for, but I guess, we're still in January, so we can still say it for now. But if this airs in February, people are like, he's still saying Happy New Year? You got to stop it.
I just do it when it's the first time I've seen someone in the new year.
In July, it's like, Happy New Year. I haven't seen you since December. Amazing. Bob, excited to get this going. Today we're doing a masterclass on the art of buying scrap. I put there winning tons. It's like, how do we go out there and source metal? Now, this will interest lots of listeners because it's something we all do on a daily basis. And just to clarify, we're not talking about bringing it on the front scale. We're talking about going out and sourcing metal. And that's something I think Shapiro are probably the best in the country, if not the world, at doing. So, Bob, couldn't imagine anybody better. So thank you for joining us.
Well, I hope not to disappoint. That's a high bar, to be sure.
Bob, before we get started, why don't you just give everybody a bit of background on how you got into the industry and a little bit more about Shapiro and your position in the market?
Very good. Well, I joined Shapiro in 2015, and I came from pretty much a manufacturing background with a little bit of time in construction and some other industries. So, I think it's been a latticed career to this point where, have lots of different experiences and different kinds of companies. And the opportunity at Shapiro presented itself, and I right away picked up in the interview process that Shapiro was attempting and desired to be a little bit different, a little bit of a niche player in the business of scrap, and liked the potential that I saw when I joined here.
And let's talk how big is Shapiro at the moment?
Shapiro is a St. Louis-based company, third generation, 121-year-old legacy. And it does industrial metal recycling with 9 locations, mostly in the lower half of the United States. We also are producers of master and custom and commodity alloys out of that recycled content. And then we also offer circular solutions to manufacturers. So we're very much focused on the industrial space and maximizing the value and now the environmental impact from our services.
Bob, I didn't say this in the beginning, but you're the president and COO, correct?
I am the president. We recently moved a young man, Andrew Hadley, into the COO role. So Now I'm just the president.
Just the president, exactly. Nothing on your shoulders, I'm sure. Bob, let's dive straight into it, right? Because these master classes, we're looking to really add value. So I'll ask you some questions to try and pull some of that information out of you. Let's start with the idea that it's quite different to a lot of other people I interview. You aren't, let's say, born scrappy. You didn't start by trading the metal or starting in the yards when you were 13 years old, in your family business, etc. But how did you learn, I guess, to buy the scrap? What did you borrow from other industries? And what was your strategy behind taking the company forward and buying, which you wouldn't have been able to get because you weren't, doing it previously?
That's a really kind of challenging question, because I think you learn iteratively how to translate maybe other experiences in the business, and you look for certain fundamentals. And I think you have this friction between the commodity aspect, kind of a spreadsheet type acquisition of volume, and then you have the valuable, differentiated customers that have other needs. And I think you're constantly in this business with this amount of overhead and fixed costs that you have to cover. You're balancing those two things. And it's a real interesting paradox, because you need to do both. And it's a challenge. And so the things that I could bring to the company were really on the latter part, which was, how could we distinguish ourselves in the market, be a little bit more interesting, offer other services. And that really focuses on customers that might be more ideal. And then you have that volume, the things that pay for your lights, you need to also pursue. And so I think, if anything, at Shapiro, we were really good on that part. We were also a little bit effective around facilitating the difference. And I think we've just kind of worked a little bit harder on that side more recently.
But yeah, Bob, I mean, that's something that's so important to so many listeners. How do you bring in more metal? And for me, I think you're touching on a really important point, which is do things differently, offer more services, offer something different to the 5 other people you're competing with. Can you give us some sort of examples of what exactly you have done over the last 10, 15 years to differentiate yourselves?
Dealing with the industrial manufacturers and not peddlers, are people bringing scrap across the scale, that really does lend itself to a little bit more value added services. I think the first thing to kind of think about is, how do you identify the customers where they would appreciate offering more services? And sometimes that is directly related to who the buyer's agent is. If it's procurement and it's strictly focused on the dollars, those value added services may be nice to have, but they're really not going to be part of the decision process. On the other side of the coin, stealing someone's language, that ideal customer, one, they're going to be collaborative. They're going to have a problem that needs to be solved. I think an important aspect of the right customer is they're leading you into the future. They're bringing you new challenges that help you consider new possible revenue streams. And you see it in the marketplace, and some of our competitors nationally are doing that. And then you got to have the right work. What are we capable of doing, or what are we willing to learn? And we've applied some of that to it. So with the right work. And then the third right is the right price. It's fair to both. And that's where the experimentation comes in. Some of the new things you're going to do, you're not really sure that your pricing model is perfect. You're more likely to learn from a mistake or an opportunity that was missed or a system that was short-sighted. And so I think the way you differentiate is you try and be somewhat empathetic. And I am coming out of manufacturing. I think manufacturers today have a lot of competing objectives. Plus, they have their regular obligation to make a high quality product at the lowest possible cost and get it out the back door. Then they have all the ancillary stuff they have to worry about: supply chain and labor shortages and safety and environmental and all of those other things. And then all of those are correlated to costs. And so how do you go into a customer and help identify the kind of the unspoken need? What are they struggling with that's not necessarily who their scrap provider is, but what are the other problems? And so what we've done is we've looked at, you know, the alley where all the byproducts end up and see what other services we could offer out there, whether it's zero landfill or closed loop systems or cardboard, wood, plastic, some other hard to recycle. Sometimes the commercial products manufacturers have warranty products that they need to destroy. And those are all the areas we've kind of expanded into.
Bob, do you have to make a margin on all the ancillary products, all the ancillary services, or do you focus mainly on the metal making you the margin, and then the rest might be kind of loss leaders and things like that?
Well, I think that's $1 million question. I think you do have to make margin on all of the services that you offer. But I think the commodity approach to it has room to evolve and change a bit. You know, you look at our competitors on the other side of the aisle in the waste industry, and they're a service first model, and we're a commodity first model. And that service first model may insulate you from some of the market dynamics a little bit. And so I think the pivot really comes down to thinking a little bit more about the service and making sure you're making your margin off of that, and maybe considering how to deal with the commodities, whether it's cardboard or plastic or wood, a little bit different, because you really are competing in some of those areas with people not from this particular industry.
I remember the stage, this must be, wow, 17, maybe, no, probably like 22 years ago in South Africa. I was looking after the Toyota account, which was obviously one of the largest accounts we had probably in the country. And we ended up losing it eventually to Green Metals, which was owned by Toyota. So I got in trouble for that, which obviously wasn't my fault. Nothing I could really do. But prior to that, I remember a company called Don't Waste Services coming into Toyota and offering them a holistic service. Now, if you can imagine, this was a massive scale. If you imagine on a smaller scale, for a company like that to just have one company to deal with, one contractor that handles everything, all the documents, all the data, everything is put into one system. It made it so easy for them. It was extremely difficult at the time to keep the metal separate, which we were able to do, but it was a massive fight. And from there, we learned to start going in and offering holistic services. One contractor, one service provider. We'll handle your waste. We'll handle your paper. We'll handle your carbon. And I think the thing there is, when we're trying to source more metal, that's a differentiator. That's somewhere where you don't realize right now, but there are other people. The waste company could be offering that. And before you know it, you lose the metal and the waste company is tendering it out.
I think that's absolutely the case. You know, we look at waste as a local problem because the logistics cost is such an impediment. And so it's really not just reducing the number of vendors a particular manager and a manufacturer might have to manage, you know, the waste management company, the cardboard company, the wood company, the metal company, the fluids company, the obsolete material partners, all of those things. Now you can see where the manufacturer's complexity, what they're contending with, is just growing exponentially, let alone the fact that if they're doing reporting for the environment or for a private equity group or whoever their ownership is, and whichever company is the headquarters, now you also got all this rework because the data on the cardboard is different than the data on the trash, which is different than the data. And when you have multiple locations, that data is even more complex because now that's times 2 or times 5 or times 10. And so consolidating all that information. And you're right, our circular solutions division is designed to make a unified approach, that holistic approach, and our plants do a lot of the service to enable that. But what we end up being able to provide our customers is one data stream. We do all of the deciphering. We reduce the number of vendors, and that ecosystem is, depending if we have a plant in the vicinity or not, we could be partnering with other scrap companies or other material recycling companies and aggregating all that information into a nice package for our customers. The bottom line is, I think you reduce variation, you reduce rework, you reduce complexity, and that one-stop shop offering, I think, given the reality of what manufacturers are dealing with, is probably becoming increasingly needed in the marketplace.
Yeah, I remember trying to get my sales team to think in this way. And it's quite hard because a lot of our sales guys, we pull out of the yards. So a lot of the guys will take their scrap guys and say, okay, now I want you to go and buy some metal. But all they know is metal. So they've got blinkers on. I mean, I look at Tim Ritterboss, your guy. I love Tim. Tim is absolutely incredible. I've had so many conversations about this topic with Tim. But my question here is, how do you train people to go into these accounts and actually have no plan until they get there? You know, you've got to be on your toes. You've got to constantly be looking for the opportunity. Most people, when they go into an account, they're thinking, how can I pay this guy the right price to land his metal? Your guys are going in there going, how can I make this decision maker the hero? And what I mean by that is, I used to say this to my sales guys, give him reporting that he can send to the executive team that he doesn't even have to work on. And the executive team go, wow, this is incredible. Make him the hero and you'll keep that account forever.
Yeah, I wish we were profoundly good at that training and we could easily make that pivot. But we're a 121-year-old company that has deep roots in metal, and particularly non-ferrous metal and scrap. So I would say we've had a prolonged journey to getting to curiosity, to getting to be really focused on the customer, not just the result from that customer. And I think we're a work in progress in that area. On one side of the equation, it comes down to teaching people that it's okay to be curious. It's okay to try something new, and creating a culture that allows us to try something. And that culture existed long before I got here. On the other side of the coin, it's confidence. And even though I think we're a company that learns from its mistakes and is the learning kind of organization, I think people are still fearful of making a mistake and taking those risks. So I wish I had a robust offering for your masterclass on here's the roadmap. I think it's experimental, because I think you have to try something new, learn from that, and apply that. And then over a period of time, you have a body of work of a bunch of different disparate custom things that now start to look like something kind of uniform that you can apply a thought process to, or a procedure to. And I also think it comes from being fortunate and lucky a little bit. You know, not every company in the United States is thinking about environmental impact or waste reduction. They have other bigger, more pressing priorities than that. And so it's really kind of those companies that are interested in that provide you with the opportunity to leverage the curiosity you brought to the game. Or they have a unique problem or a mandate that they have to solve. And I think there's a kind of a confluence of several different things there. There's curiosity on your team's part, and knowing that we as management have their back to try something new. We're excited to try something new. Maybe it'll develop into a new revenue stream. I think it's also a little bit of vision, saying that, we kind of want to help companies in this area to help make the planet better together. And then I think it's a little bit of good fortune and crossing paths with those people that actually desire to do that or have a mandate to do that. And so I don't have a magic bullet there. I think it's an iterative approach that we're taking to it, a very experimental approach. We have made a ton of mistakes in our systems and our processes trying to force services into a scrap mentality. It's a really interesting transformation, but at the same time, you also have this other part of your business model which says, I need to continue to pursue metal for metal's sake, and doing both can be confusing. And so I think that's where the time comes in, where you got to kind of develop some new muscles while you maintain and keep your other muscles healthy.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I still remember the day I was in Durban, South Africa, and I just kind of started on the sales side of things, and I'd been in yards all the time. And somebody gave me a notepad, because they were always like, you've got to take notes every time you go to a customer, right? You've got to write down notes, which I still do today. And on the front of it said, add value. And if you can just sum up almost everything you said, it was like, you don't know where it's going to be. You don't know who you're going to meet with. But if all you're thinking is your job here is to add value, then you don't walk past a whole bunch of broken pallets lying on the floor at a customer and just leave it. And you don't walk past an overflowing waste bin, or you don't walk past a waste bin full of cardboard and paper. You say, how can I add value here? I can add value by telling them, do you know that if you sort this, we can take this away and pay you for it, or we can remove this and you won't pay. Like things like that. And that's how we try to train our sales team. That was the first thing I ever got taught, I guess, in sales. And I think it's that mentality that when you walk into a customer, if you're thinking about yourself and how you can land this metal for you, you're going in the wrong way and you don't have your head in the right place. If you're thinking add value, I'm telling you, you've got a better chance of coming out there with their account.
Yeah, I think your comment there was much more succinct. But if you combine going to a customer with curiosity and the mindset of adding value, you pretty much summed up that whole conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I get paid to do. I get paid to sum up what you guys have said, make it simple, and put it in a short form. I just take your information and I sum it up.
I'm going to steal it and use it now. I can be much more succinct.
No. We like the detail as well. It's important. Bob, let's move a little bit onto some of the things that are maybe more operational. What I'm thinking about is how you lose deals. And sometimes you have to make some really hard decisions when you're buying the metal. I always say to people, one, manage expectations, because that's really important. And number two, do what you say you're going to do. Because if you can kind of handle those two things, you shouldn't have a problem. Can you think of a time where, keeping your word actually cost the company money, but it paid off at a later stage?
Shapiro being around for as long as it's had, there's been lots of opportunities. And even in my 10, 11 years here, I've witnessed lots of opportunities where, keeping our word is a fundamental value. One of the things that attracted to me was the philosophy at the time when I was hired was partner with integrity. And it's been evidenced in our organization quite frequently. Formulas can get out of whack and you could be getting a little piggy and maybe taking too much profit, or you could be buying the material wrong. And I would say there's been many occasions whereby we've gone back and provided our customers with a correction for something like that has occurred. And So I think when you think about the third right price, it's fair to both. And I think partnering with integrity is how Shapiro's maintained that fairness in its thought process. So, yeah, I think there's been deals. I think also we've taken contracts where, in the volatility we've dealt with in the last few years, where the contract went south right out of the gate. And we sucked that up for a period of time because the formulas were out of whack. And now we have those customers 5, 10, 20 years down the road because we worked through those kind of issues with them. So yeah, I think there's many examples like that in our company, and I think in most of the companies that I'm aware of.
Especially the ones that have been around for a long time. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand, right? When you're willing to take a knock when you have to, it usually builds a reputation that you're good people to deal with. But I have a question. I have to ask you this question. It's so easy to sit there and say, when we make too much money, we like to share the love and kind of like give a little bit back because it's the right thing to do. And we just want to make the fair amount of margin. But surely then the opposite of that is when things go bad, you say to them, we gave it to you when we were making too much. We expect you to kind of share the love now. But that's a hard conversation to have. How do you manage that?
Yeah, well, I think the fundamental requisite is the integrity and trust that you build in the relationships that enable that trust and integrity to be demonstrated. And so those are not easy conversation to have, and they're not easy tasks to assign to your team to administer in any way, shape, or form. You find out where the real partnership exists and doesn't exist through those processes. Sometimes you're successful in them, and other times you're not successful in them. And so all of it kind of reveals where you are with your customer relationship and how strong that partnership really, really is. So, no, it's not easy. Do we attempt to do it? Yes. I think one of the things that might or might not be true is I think the more volatile it is, the more acceptable those kind of conversations are. And the tighter the volatility, when it's right on the edge, it might be a little bit harder to administer. So I've seen us have more success in these wide swings than in those little incremental swings with those kind of conversations. Because they're probably experiencing that same volatility on their raw materials. And so when you're dealing with the byproducts, it's a natural extension.
You said something interesting about it's often your sales guy who has to have those tough conversations. I've been in that position on both sides, having to tell the sales guys to go and do it and also being the sales guy to have to do it. There's nothing worse than having to walk into a conversation and say to one of your key accounts, we're losing money because the market doesn't make sense, right? Because whatever's going on in the market is the problem. Mm-hmm. They usually turn around and say, but you chose the market. You said we're going to link it to this. And you said it's going to be like, how can you now tell me you don't want to do that, right? Those are horrible discussions to have. Very tough.
Yeah, I think it does boil down onto, if you're a trusted advisor to your customers, you're likely sharing insights with them to keep them informed of what's happening. Now, the bigger you get, the more customers you have, the more span of control your salespeople have with their customers, the harder that is to maintain. But I do think there's some proactivity and information that helps our customers stay informed. We certainly can get better at that, but that's on our roadmap.
Bob, there's other things when people are out there buying and what doesn't necessarily pitch up on the scale ticket. So you go out there, we buy some metal, what are the things that you also are very wary of, and how do you manage that, right? What I mean by that is whether it's the quality issues that come in from these sort of accounts, there's contamination, the logistics, your reliability, and the cost that sometimes the sales guys didn't calculate correctly.
It really comes down to plan, do, check, act. I think a lot of companies are good at the plan, the intake, taking in the conveyed information or the information on the spreadsheet with regard to volumes, and taking the customer at their word on what the commodities are, whether it's contaminated or it has poly on it or whatever the case may be. And then your plants start to receive that material. It might be one location, it might be two. And lo and behold, not everything is exactly what the corporate office presented the opportunity as. And so I think where we've concentrated our efforts is on the check part, verifying that what we expected to have happen, visually demonstrate what's different, whether it's photos or it's a video or whatever the situation requires. And then I think it's adjust. So our act is to adjust and refine that process. Now, when you don't do that, you typically identify it in a margin analysis or a profit review, and you go, oh, hell, what did our plants do wrong? That's our first thing.
Exactly.
And it really was further up the line. It wasn't what we expected. And so we've built systems into our operations, and I'm sure many others have as well, to do that plan, do, check, act, verify what we have. And guess what? Nothing stays exactly the same. So you also have to have a way to monitor it and resolve the issues as new things get introduced to the plant. Maybe they changed vendors, maybe they changed a workflow, maybe they changed a production line. And your system has to be able to accommodate and identify those changes. And we've built systems to do that, and reporting structures and communication channels that assure that we respond to those. And what we're working on now is how to respond to them even faster.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, in New Zealand, we rolled out a Salesforce implementation, which gave us a holistic view of a customer. Thankfully, I had my wife there to do it because I wouldn't have had a clue what to do. But the data that it gave me was just so powerful. I'll never forget, we landed a really large manufacturing company, an industrial company, and they were doing a huge amount of ferrous. And in fact, some beautiful, beautiful PNS. And I'll never forget going there, looking at the bins, and then having to put in a quote. And the guy said to me, he's adamant he was getting 5 tons in all the bins. And I said, but it doesn't look like you're getting 5 tons because it's big, bulky pieces. He's like, no, it's really heavy. And I said, no problem. We can absolutely price it, but you need to commit to 5 tons. And I put it in our agreement. In fact, after this, I put it in all my agreements that the minimum average weight has to be, this amount. And within the second week, it was averaging like 2.5 tons. It was almost exactly half. Now, if you take a transport cost, and if the transport on ferrous is often a huge cost, if you take that and you half the weight in the bin, immediately your transport cost just doubled per metric ton. Now, I went back to the customer and they had a fit. They were like, you're walking away from the agreement. You can't change the pricing now, etc. I mean, it was a crazy situation to be in because I had all the evidence I needed to say like, well, I can't pay that price. I'm now losing money to it. But I also at the time realized why they had swapped scrap metals company servicing them about 6 times in 2 years. Because they were unfortunately those kind of people that were just going to look to screw you as much as they possibly could. And they didn't care because now you had signed an agreement and that hopefully you're going to stay on. So those are the kind of things that often, and I love what you said, plan, do, something, act. Plan, do, check, act.
Check, act. Yeah, it's an old term. But
it's because it's so vital, because you land an account, the salesperson moves on or handles the relationship, and no one is checking what the actual tickets are. What is the weight that is coming every day? Because it's as if they're 2 separate businesses in our industry. It's like one's transport, one's the yard. And then there's sales. Nobody knows that sales made their price based on 5 tons per bin. All they know is it comes in, the weighbridge guy just puts in the weight and it moves on, and then they get paid.
No doubt.
Just so
I mean, I think payloads are another area that I could have highlighted, but at the same time, a lot of these kind of bids that we deal with on the industrial side are now being handled by a corporate office, right? And that corporate office collects the data from their yards or from the previous vendors' invoices or wherever they get them. But just like payloads, you also have the same issue with what the commodities are. And you might have a company out there buying a certain alloy with poly on it and buying it as bare, or buying it clean and dry and the weights are off because of moisture. So you have all of those dynamics. And if you don't verify up front, you're going to be fixing it down the road, and fixing it down the road is much harder. So we are working very diligently of getting that up the timeline and trying to get even faster from where we've been.
Yeah, the sooner you can deal with that, because otherwise it becomes the norm, and then the customers, but for 6 months, this wasn't an issue. It's as if you now want to try and make money from me. And that's how they react. And I wouldn't blame them, because you as a company, I would expect you to manage it carefully and know what's coming in and bring it up with me straight away.
Yeah, I think you have all kinds of dynamics taking place out there. If you're dealing with a one-off location, tight systems, following a good competitor to set up a good program, your data is going to be pretty close. Mm-hmm. And then if you're dealing with a corporate office that's aggregating 3 locations, people call things different things. They say they're doing the same thing. There's been a personnel change in the middle, and when corporate gathered the data, the person didn't even know there were a couple pieces of equipment on the yard that wasn't in the plan, and now you're deploying a trailer or a roll-off or some asset that you have to capture a little bit of return on for the deal to make sense, and it wasn't even in your budget or in your quote. So I think reviewing that, confirming it, we use a customer service department. We have 3 or 4 guys that are kind of intermediaries between our customers and our operations, and they help us with that verification so significantly. We've gotten off to a lot better start because of them.
Is there any specific data point that people should look at? Where should sales guys or managers or anybody, when they're looking at buying, what data points should they be really monitoring?
Well, I think you have all the regular ones, right? Volumes, the alloy, what kind of form are those alloys in? All of those standards. I also think you got to take into consideration where that material is likely to be sold, and consider the logistics cost both to your facility. What kind of processing work are you going to have to do to that material to maximize it for transport or for value? So I don't think I'm telling this industry with my limited experience anything they don't already know. Are there any intangibles? Boy, that's a case-by-case basis. I think sometimes the cutting fluid and the disposal of cutting fluid might be one of those that kind of might catch people by surprise, because that's almost impossible to calculate. How much is standing and how much is regular? Where do they store the containers? Does rain go in the containers? Are they covered? Do they have lids? I mean,
everything. Yeah. Every one of those things are vital. Every one of those things can eat into your margin. And that's, another masterclass where I talk about margin. There's so many things that are hidden that if you're not looking at it, if you're not on top of it, all of a sudden your bottom line isn't what you expected it to be. And you got to go all the way back to the beginning and just work out every one of those things that you just said. Have a look at each one.
Yes, you do.
Bob, what makes, in your opinion, what makes a great buyer?
I think I'm going to oversimplify this. But if we go back to our previous point, I promised you I could be more succinct as a result of it. I think it comes down to being curious, adding value, and being able to build a relationship for the long term, even if the immediate solution isn't Shapiro. I don't have a really sophisticated answer to that. There are people that you're going to go meet with that are be bright, be brief, be gone. I got 3 minutes for you. And then you got to be situationally aware and able to handle a situation like that and impress them in 3 minutes. And you have other people that want to sit down and have a long conversation and maybe join you for lunch afterwards. And I think you just have to be able to accommodate the situation. But I do think the underlying tenets are, it's not about us or the product we have to sell. It is about them and how can we add value and what problems could we help them with? And is there an opportunity in those problems for Shapiro to differentiate itself, attempt something new, develop a new competency? And are we willing to do that? At least the opportunity to consider it.
That's awesome, Bob. I like that. That's kind of summarized so much of what was said earlier, which is a great way to finish the episode right now. But before we go, Bob, I need to ask you a couple of really important questions, which I ask every guest. So let's jump into them. What's your best TV show or movie?
I was thinking about that question. I'm going to say The Replacements. It's a movie about...
It's a comedy.
It's a comedy. It has Gene Hackman and Keanu Reeves, and it's about the replacement players during a football strike. And I just love to laugh. So that's it.
That's awesome. I haven't seen that for years. I think it's quite old, isn't it? 20 years ago.
It's not. Yeah, well, maybe even longer. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think I have seen it. What's your best place to visit?
Alaska.
Oh wow! What do you do there? You personally?
I've been there with my family once. We did a cruise, kind of get a feel for it. I cannot wait to go back. It's everything from my daughter and my wife can hike and take in, nature. My son and I can fish. It's kind of like visiting the mountains. If you've visited the mountains, you feel different when you're in the mountains. When you're in Alaska, you feel different.
I get it. For me, it's safari in South Africa, that feeling. So I totally get it. Have you got a favorite book?
Yeah, I think trust is the premise of a lot of leadership. So I'm going to go with Credibility by Kuzner and Posner. It's a 20-year-old book. I read a lot, but if I had to pick one, I would probably be my foundation.
Good one. Like it. Lastly, your favorite quote?
Whew, man, that's a tough one.
I knew I would stump you eventually with a tough question.
I do so many quotes for my team, and I can't remember one to save my butt right now. I'm going to go with Control Your Own Destiny or Someone Else Will by Jack Welch.
Beautiful. Bob, this was awesome. Thank you for spending time with us and giving us so much of your wealth of knowledge. Thanks, Bob.
I appreciate it, Stuart. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thanks, Bob. That's it for this episode of Born Scrappy. If you have any questions, stories, or topics you want us to dig into, send them my way. Until then, keep it scrappy.